Alison Hammer and Bradeigh Godfrey. I am delighted to have you both here. We have talked before about doing this. You guys have already done the How Writers Revise essay, and now I get to talk to you about your journeys. Before we start, first of all, welcome. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Oh,
Before we start, I want to read each of your bios, and then as we talked about, maybe just dig in a little bit on your journeys separately, and also you write together. So I'd love to talk a little bit more about that too, and your process for that. Here you are. Bradeigh Godfrey, we'll go alphabetically, is a physician caring for veterans with visible and invisible disabilities. Her debut novel, Imposter, is a psychological thriller that explores sisterhood and secrets. I love this, the neuroscience of memory and trauma. And that released in September of 2022 with Blackstone Press, I believe.
yes.
And then you have a follow-up, The Followers, that comes out in August. Alison, you have been a creative director at an ad agency in Chicago, and now you are an author of upmarket women's fiction. I know that I've read both your first two. You and Me and Us was your debut, which published in 2020. That was with William Morrow, a division of HarperCollins, followed up by Little Pieces of Me in 2021 by the same publisher. But together, Alison and Bradeigh are Ali Brady, who is an author of 3 books, one that came out, The Beach Trap, published in 2022, made several best of summer reading lists, including the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and Katie Couric Media. Congrats. And then y'all's follow-up released in May. When we're recording this, we're just before release, but by the time people are seeing it, it'll have released. And then you have a third coming up called... did I say what that one was called? The Comeback Summer. And then Camp People releases in summer 2024, all from Berkley Penguin. So I just kind of want to sum up for everyone watching. We're looking at from 2020 to now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 novels.
Crazy.
That is insane. So I don't even know where to start. There's so much I want to dig into, but first tell me what it's like to write 6 novels in that period of time.
Well, it's funny because I'm like, okay, so 6 novels between us. When will we feel like we know what's going on and what we're doing? It feels like every book is a different adventure, and every time you start with a blank page, it's a lot of the same stuff. But when you look at it like that, it's hard to think about that on just a normal basis. So I'm proud of us.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a huge accomplishment. It's interesting to me that you both got published, and Alison, you and I have talked a little about this, beginning with the pandemic. So Alison, you had already begun writing at that point. Bradeigh, did you begin writing during the pandemic like so many writers? Or
No, I had been writing for a while, but I got my first book deal during the pandemic. Yeah.
Okay. So when you say a while, what's a while?
I mean, a few years. We
Okay.
can go through the whole timeline whenever you want, but yeah, it took a while.
All right, let's do it. So we were going to start with Alison, and we've completely trashed the plan already.
Okay.
This is what happens. So yeah, Bradeigh, tell me, I know obviously you've been a physician, and that's got to be incredibly demanding, and you have kids. Yes.
Yes.
So at what point do you fit in the writing, and when did you decide you wanted to do that?
Yes, great question. So growing up, I was one of those kids that was always reading and writing and creating stories. But then, when I decided to apply to medical school, and I sort of went on that track, there was no time for anything else. So sort of the creative part of myself fell by the wayside for a lot of years. And it wasn't until I was done with all my medical training and I had my kids and I had these little kids, and I was working part-time because I had these, small kids that I was raising. And I just started to get this like nagging little voice saying, you should write again. You should write again. And I tried to not listen because I thought I'm way too busy anyway. I do not need anything else to do. And who's going to want to read what I write anyway? So I tried to not listen for a good year or two. And then I finally just sat down, and I remember the day so clearly when I sat down, pulled out my husband's old laptop and just started writing. And it was this huge feeling of relief. Like I was finally doing what I was supposed to be doing. And I just kept going. I mean, I really didn't ever stop. I just started writing every single day, pretty much. And within a year or so, I had kind of a draft of a novel, and I thought, okay, I want to try to actually get published. And so then it was, querying and writing another book. And it was actually the third kind of full-length manuscript I wrote and revised when I actually signed with an agent. So there was a few years in there of like querying, and this is when I met Alison and we became friends. And I was so sure when I got that agent, that I was going to sell a book and it was going to work out perfectly. And then, and I think I had 4 agents who offered representation within, a couple of weeks. And so I thought, well, definitely somebody's going to love this book. Some editor's going to fall in love and it's going to be a bestseller. And then it didn't sell, right? We went on submission and it didn't sell. And it was sort of crushing. Alison remembers this whole, it was so crushing. And I've since found out that that's more common than we think with writers, that you sign with an agent who's really enthusiastic and then the book doesn't ever get picked up by a publisher. And I think there's like a unique amount of pain that comes with that because you think you're so close. But anyway,
even to back up before that it was your third manuscript.
It was my third manuscript. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I think it's really easy to think, okay, it's such a huge accomplishment to finish a full-length manuscript. And then clearly you were querying that and did not have luck with any agents on those first 2.
Did not have luck with the first one. So it was interesting. The first one, it was kind of messy. It was the first book I'd ever written. So I queried it, but I was immediately working on a next book. And then the next one that I worked on, once I had it ready and polished up and queried, I got a lot of interest from agents. I think about half of the queries I sent out, they said, yes, please send me the full manuscript. And I had a couple agents call me and talk to me about doing a revise and resubmit to them. Like there was interest there, but nothing seemed to click. But I luckily had been, meanwhile, writing this third book through this whole process. And that's the one that finally landed me an agent. So there was this sort of progression through the years.
So how did you, especially with this, you're having gone into medicine and this being kind of, oh, now I'm going to try to do this. How did you continue to believe in your writing when 2, not just 1, but 2 manuscripts hadn't landed you an agent? And then when your third one did not get the publishing contract you hoped?
So I think there was a few things that kept me going. One was Alison, for sure, because at this point we were, critique partners and had become very, very close friends. And so she was constantly saying, like, keep going, don't give up. I know this is really hard, but I believe in you. And then
at this point, sorry to interrupt. At this point, Alison, had you gotten a publishing contract?
Yes.
Okay.
I had. Yes. And so she was, 100% in my corner. And my husband was also like similarly in my corner. Like, you can do this. You've got to keep going. But I really did think about, there were many times when I thought about quitting, but I kept thinking about how long it takes to become a doctor. It took me 12 years to get fully board certified, to go from the start to the beginning to the end of the whole process. So I kept thinking, like, why would it be that different as a writer to get good at being a writer, and even when I started practicing as a physician, it took me even a few more years before I felt like I felt very comfortable with what I was doing. So I figured it would take at least as long as writing. Why would writing be easier? I don't think it's easier.
I love that analogy. Go ahead, Alison.
Do you want to, my favorite, do you want to tell people about March 4th?
Oh, well, I started writing that very first novel, right around March, around March 4th. And that day sort of became this sort of symbolic day because of the double meaning of the word. March 4th, Marching 4th. So every year, March 4th would roll around again. And I would think, do I want to keep marching forth on this path towards publication? Am I going to re-up for another year? So every year I would just try, am I going to re-up for another year? And I almost stopped the March before I ended up I got the book deal in September. So it was that last one that I thought, I'm going to do it one more year.
I love the analogy about, I always joke when I meet people and they go, oh, I'd love to read books for a living. And I go, oh, really? I'd love to do brain surgery for a living. But we don't think about the fact, or I think a lot of authors don't think about the fact that every other career in the world you do have, or pursuit, you have a huge learning curve. If you want to play a musical instrument, Absolutely. If you want to learn a sport, there's this long period where you're going to suck at it. Yes. And everything is kind of coming in instead of necessarily coming out as the product you're hoping it will. The fact that you had that perspective as someone in medicine, I think, is really good for a lot of authors to pay attention to, because this is normal. this is the process. It's how you get where you're going.
Absolutely. It's a slog. I think you have to
It's
just
a slog.
you have to embrace the slog. Like if you're not good at the long slog, you're not going to be good at writing. You have to just keep slogging away.
And I think there's one other point that I would love for Bradeigh to talk about, because that third book did not get published when her agent tried to sell it. But Bradeigh, do you want to tell what happened to it?
That's the book that's coming out in August. So that became the second book in my deal.
So you wrote a fourth one then.
Then I wrote
that was The Imposters.
Yeah. That was Imposter. And I wrote that sort of in a frenzy the summer of 2019. I mean, I wrote the whole book in like 8 weeks. I was just completely focused on writing this book as quickly as possible, because I had this feeling like if I don't get published, I'm going to give up because I felt like I was reaching the end of my rope, like fourth book. And that one went through, we went on submission and got some feedback and then revised. And there was sort of this, back and forth as there is with, when you go on submission, and a couple editors, wanted to do the phone call to talk. And then in the end, they were like, I just can't make an offer. And there was some ups and downs through that process, but eventually got the offer from Blackstone, who has been really great to work with.
That's wonderful. And then I take it that was a 2-book deal. And so you pitched them that third novel.
Yep.
Okay. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Alison, I want to bring you into the story, into the timeline here. So you had already published by the time Bradeigh was going through this, and you guys met in a critique group. Were you published at that time when y'all met?
Not at all. Our journeys were really pretty aligned. Like, I think I got my agent a little bit before she did, but we were pretty much in step with each other, which was really great.
And you also started in a completely different career. You worked in advertising, but you've always been, you went to, what is it, Creative Circus in Atlanta?
Yeah.
Tell me what that is. And was that related to writing?
It was. So it's interesting. And I feel the same way about advertising as I did about publishing. Because to me, advertising was what Angela did on Who's the Boss. And like that, like I didn't realize it was a real job. And with novels, like I knew somebody wrote the books, but I didn't imagine I could be that somebody. So had you
written like as a kid when you were younger?
Short stories and poems, but I just never thought about it. And then my freshman year of college, I took an intro to advertising class and my mind was blown. I was like, wow, there's a career where I can use my writing talent, be creative, have health insurance and a steady paycheck. And so I was just super excited. And after I graduated from University of Florida, I went to the Creative Circus, which it just closed this year, which is heartbreaking, but it was a portfolio school where basically you work for 2 years, like almost a fake agency, just creating ads to get your portfolio. Because in advertising, you don't really get a job on your resume, you get it on your portfolio. So I spent 2 years doing that. And all the while I was writing, I also was a dual major with English creative writing. And so I had a book idea I was working on. My first manuscript took me 15 years to finish. And I think it's because I was so focused on advertising that the fiction was just like a hobby when I had time for it.
And was your intention that one day you might publish it?
No, I didn't even really consider it. But
when did that change?
When I finished the book. I had been living in Pittsburgh at the time, and I'd been working on this book for 15 years. And I still it still holds a really special place in my heart, but I'd been revising it and revising it and revising it. And I would do writing workshops. In the first 75 pages, I still think they're perfect. But the whole manuscript was 120,000 words long. Because when I reached a point where I was like, I will never finish the book if I don't finish the book. And I know that sounds really obvious, but I had spent so much time perfecting the beginning that I didn't reach the end. So I made a goal that by the end of the year, I would finish the book. And when I finished it, I'm like, it's done. I should maybe see if I can do something with it. And so I queried it at 120,000 words. And the fact that's, for people who
we should clarify, sorry, this is women's fiction. So that's not out of the realm, but especially for a debut, it's pretty high.
It's like 20,000 words too high.
At least.
And people were like, you should get beta readers. I'm like, no, I'm done. I've been working on this for so long. So I bought a book about how to find an agent and I started querying. And believe it or not, I got quite a few requests, which I think is a testament to how strong the opening pages were. And I made a pretty big mistake though. I had 3 or 4 fulls out and I was like, one of them is going to want me. So I stopped querying, which was a mistake. And And one by one, I got rejected by the agents, and one of them gave me an R&R. And she was a local Chicago agent. So we met for breakfast. Abby Saul, she's amazing.
Sorry, just for the kids at home, if you don't know, R&R is a revise and resubmit, which means there's some notes, see if you can make it better according to what we think would make it better. And then we'd like to see it again.
Absolutely. So Abby had said, is this book about one thing or is it about the other? It was actually the same characters from You and Me and Us 20 years earlier. And so the very beginning had Alexis, my main character, getting dumped by her long-term boyfriend and throwing herself into a project at work. And then when the project was over, she goes to the beach. And the agent was like, is this a story about like throwing yourself into work, or is it about running away to the beach? And the answer was obviously running away to the beach, which meant that the first 30,000 words that I had perfected were all gone.
And that takes a lot of fortitude to see that and then to just do it.
Yeah. But like Brady said, one of the biggest pieces of advice I've heard and followed is that as soon as you finish one thing, start writing the next. And so even while I was querying, I was writing the book that would eventually become You and Me and Us. And I met my agent at one of those writing workshop events. I paid $28 for 10 minutes with her, which is the best money I've ever spent. And at the time, I had 2 query letters in my little folder. I had the one for the project that I'd been querying for a year, my first manuscript, and the one for You and Me and Us. And the first person I met with was an assistant editor, and she said that my second one was more marketable. So the first agent I met with was Joanna, who I ended up signing with, and she requested the full manuscript. And then like 8 months later, offered representation, which was amazing. So that was in 2018.
Okay.
I worked with her.
And that was for You and Me and Us, not the first one. That was for
You and Me and Us.
Okay.
And I worked with her for several months on revisions. And then I should also say, one of the Brady and I work so well together because even before we started writing books together, we were writing books together. Like she had such a big impact on You and Me and Us. And I, maybe not as big of an impact, but I helped her with her books too. We were such good critique partners and really ingrained in the process, which I don't think that You and Me and Us would be the book that it is without Brady's help. So I worked on revisions with my agent. And then when it was ready, we went on submission and ended up going to auction, which was just like an absolute dream come true.
Yes.
It was crazy. And ended up going with William Morrow, HarperCollins. And the book was coming out April 7th, 2020, 3 weeks into the pandemic. So I was supposed to be in airport bookstores, which was just a dream of mine. But then the airport shut down. I had to cancel all of my events. I actually have some of them here. I had these little Kleenex with my book cover on it because it's a tearjerker. I still have like 50 or 60 of them. And so, it didn't go as planned, but the book's out in the world and people are still reading it, which just amazes me.
Okay, but hold on. I want to go back. I want to dig a little there because you're smiling and you're like, well, it all turned out okay. And it has. And that's the important thing, is to see how successful both of you are separately and together, despite these setbacks. But that must have been, to be a debut author and have your book be at auction and it's going to be a big deal. And there's this huge marketing plan. And then the most unforeseen thing in the world comes and just guts all of that. What was that like? How did you handle that?
Terrible. It was awful. And I am a person who tries to look on the bright side with silver linings, but there were 2 moments that I lost it. One was it was March 12th when we got sent home from work for 2 weeks. I was walking to the grocery store because I had not paid attention to all the hype. So I'm like, I need toilet paper. I need all these groceries. And I called my dad on the walk and I was like, do you think I'm going to be okay for my events? Because it was in 3 weeks. And he's like, this is 2 weeks. You're going to be fine. Haha, hold my beer. No, it wasn't. But I was just really as soon as I had turned the corner away from my office, I started crying. And then a week before launch, so we'd already been into the pandemic, the director of marketing that I'd been working with on my book left William Morrow. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I just was like hysterical crying. I was like, what is going to happen to my poor book that I love so much? And, it's so hard to look back and be like, what could have happened or what might have happened? Because I don't know. I think that it would have possibly done better if it weren't for the pandemic, because bookstores were closed and publishing as a whole did great during the pandemic, but not debut authors unless they were like one of the big picks. because debut authors count on booksellers and people to hand sell and hand recommend the book, and that wasn't happening. But I also, and this might be a bigger or different conversation, I'm not sure if publishing companies know how to really sell and target and market women's fiction. So I don't know what would have happened to the book, but being in the airport would have been cool. I'm sure it would have done at least a little bit better than it did, but it was heartbreaking.
Yeah. But you did have, both of you had 2-book deals. So you have 2 books each that come out. And then at what point in those timelines, each of your timelines, do you decide to start writing together, and why?
You want to take this one, Bradeigh?
Sure. So as we've sort of hinted at, we became critique partners sort of while we were in the stage where we were preparing our books to start to query. Is that right, Alison? Am I thinking that we were about that time?
I think before we queried, because I know you helped me with my revisions of
That's
your
right, yes.
before I queried.
Yes. And we were beta readers for each other. We swapped pages, and then we kept swapping pages until we became officially critique partners.
I just have to say that.
Other?
I'm sorry?
Sorry, how did you find each other?
Well, the way the story goes is that I did a little bit of light cyber stalking on Bradeigh.
Okay, cool.
We were both
Not
members.
at all weird.
We were both members of WFWA, the Women's Fiction Writers Association, and through that organization there are different like online workshops and things. And I saw Bradeigh had done just, it was like 250 words or something, and I read it and I was like, oh my god, she's really good. And a few months later there was an opportunity to swap pages, and I jumped at it, and we both hit it off instantly, not only liking each other's writing, but liking the way we each critique, which is really important. Because I've had some people that critique my work and try to change every word. And it's like, you just don't like my writing, and that's okay. But Bradeigh and I really hit it off. And like she said, we became beta readers. And when she called me her CP, her critique partner, which is like going steady for writers, I was like giddy. I was so happy.
Okay, so you had been doing that, and then you had each gotten your own publishing contract at this point?
I had not yet.
Okay.
Alison had. This was in 2020, spring of 2020. And I was sort of in the middle of trying to revise Imposter. And I eventually did get a book deal for that, but I had not yet. So it was spring of 2020, and we were both, home like the rest of the world. I was home. I was homeschooling my kids and doing virtual appointments with patients. Alison was working from home, and we were messaging each other all day long because, like everybody else in the world, we wanted distraction and we wanted things to keep our mind off of what else was going on in the world. And we just were bouncing around book ideas one day, and Alison shared an idea and I shared an idea. And then one of us said, why don't we put them together and write a book together? And then we said, great, let's do it. And we just started. We didn't ask our agents what they thought. We just decided to start writing a book together.
And it blows my mind. Like it literally was as simple as that. We were like, we should put our names together and be Ali Brady. And like, it was such a throwaway one-off conversation. And the fact that we have 2 books out and 2 more on the way, it's like, it really blows my mind.
Crazy.
So were you factoring in, can we do this and also continue to do our solo work? Like, that's a huge commitment.
We didn't really.
We're learning that now. Brady's learning that now. I haven't had a solo book. I've had the pandemic did some damage to my solo career. I'm still hopeful and planning on doing more solo books, but I've been focusing on Ali Brady. But Bradeigh has, on top of having her family and everything, has had 2 releases a year, an Ali Brady one and a Bradeigh Godfrey one. So Bradeigh, did you have any idea how hard that would be?
No, I didn't have any idea how hard it would be. I will say that both of the books that have come out with Blackstone, I wrote them in 2018 and 2019. Like, they were written and done. Of course I had to do revisions, but I have not drafted. Well, actually I have been drafting a new book on my own, but it's not under contract. So there's no deadline for it. So yeah, but it has been crazy. It has been crazy.
Yeah. So all right, tell us a little bit about, and I know you talk about this in the essay, but when you decided to start writing together, did you immediately know the way that you'll do it, I think, is with each of your books, is that one of you is one character basically and takes a chapter. One of you is another. Generally you have 2 character books. Yes. At least the one I read.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And maybe even throw out, because I know we're talking about like successes and setbacks. Our first book we wrote together didn't sell.
Mm-hmm.
It was a book that took place during the
Is it
pandemic.
Beach Trap?
No, there was another, the first book we wrote together was a different book.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Do
It was
tell.
called, it's called Shelter in Another Place. And as you might guess, it took place during the pandemic. And the woman who became our editor was like, I love their writing. I love their voice. I love everything about it, but it's just too soon to write a pandemic book. And we'd also, people just aren't ready for that. And we'd also included just a paragraph about our idea for the beach trap. And she's like, that's a book that I'd love to read. So we like in 1 or 2 months put together 5 chapters. We put
That's my
together
vicious dog. Sorry.
So really quickly, we put together 5 chapters and an outline and sold it on that. But our first book, we still have hopes that one day it'll come out. But The Beach Trap was our second book.
Okay, so you both had experienced, both separately and together, having manuscripts rejected and then persisting. And Bradeigh, you talked about you sort of had the mindset because of your career that this is just part of the process. Alison, what kept you going during that?
Likely also Bradeigh. I mean, I think that we are very, very lucky to have such a strong support system. And for me, like once I got a taste of it, I just, one of the things we talk about is writing is hard. Like it's really hard. And it's not something that you do for the money. It's not something you do, like you do it because you can't not do it. And I have a lot of stories in my head that I want to tell. And I feel like I got screwed a little bit because of the pandemic, and I'm not going to let that stop me. So, there was a big conversation, and I wrote a whole piece about that experience and trying to sell my solo third book, and how the industry was like, you have to pivot and change and do something else. But I wanted to stay true to who I am and what I do. So the other thing, and Bradeigh hinted at this also, is that publishing is a long game. Like we don't want to be a one and done. Like we want to have a career in this. And we've talked a lot about the whole book a year cadence and how publishing companies really want authors to stick to that. But a lot of readers can't catch up. And having this outlet of Ali Brady and like writing a book with my best friend. So yeah, I didn't get to go on a book tour for my solo books, but that meant that my first ever book tour was with Bradeigh. And it was so much fun to share that experience and do it together. So I'm, of course, if I could go back and change the pandemic, I would. Yeah. But I'm playing the long game, and I really don't think I ever thought about stopping.
I love that. I love the point that you bring up that, Bradeigh, you said something about the March 4th and how you were wondering if you had one more go in you. And then Alison, you said you write because you have to write, even though this isn't necessarily a money-making proposition. I've been thinking and talking a lot about this lately with authors, as far as this often isn't a money-making career, and it's certainly rarely one that an author can support themselves with. And it is a long game, and there's much that is out of your control, and there are lots of ups and downs. What advice would you have for younger authors or newer authors on how to approach that? Like this, basically, it's like saying, keep buying a lottery ticket and maybe you'll win, but probably you won't. But there's something about, like, writing is different from that. There is something about it that is a calling that's, Alison, you mentioned sharing your stories. And Bradeigh, you said you write because you can't not write. How do you balance those things where, it's not like you can go, oh, I'm going to be okay with this because on the other side of it is that brass ring. If I just hang in there, maybe it is and maybe it isn't. But you're both talking about a long-term career, which I think is a powerful way to think about it. How do you orient yourself toward that mindset, given the realities of this industry?
One thing I think is that the publishing industry has changed so much over the years, and traditional publishing, which we were, lucky enough to have some success in, isn't the only way. And so a lot of times when I'm talking with newer authors, it's like, what is your goal? Is your goal just to get your book out and let people read it? There are small presses, there is self-publishing, there are so many different outlets. The gatekeeping and just the pressure for traditional publishing is so severe and intense. And like Bradeigh said, every step you're like, okay, I made it. But we're at 6 books in and don't feel like we've fully made it yet, because it's like every book is, how will this book do? Will that mean that we can write another book? There's just constant struggles. And I think that if we ever hit a road where, if God forbid traditional publishing isn't interested in us and we still have stories, I don't know, we might try to find other ways to keep doing it. I think you have to be as creative with the publishing path as you are with the work. And again, if it's something that, it's funny, Gigi says this in a character in our book, it's like, what is the loss versus the gain? What's the risk versus the reward? Like, if you can't not write, you have to keep going. And you have to know that, again, for me, it was my second book. For Bradeigh, it was her third or fourth book. Like, it's just a long game. And if you don't have patience, then maybe it's not for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bradeigh,
yeah. It's a long, like I said, I feel like it's a long slog, and you have to be okay with doing that, right? It's a lot of time sitting by yourself with your butt in a chair, thinking things and putting them on pages. But I think I think you have to love, or at least feel a driven to or called to write those stories. Because if you don't love the process of it, and I think love can be a complicated feeling, because sometimes it drives you crazy because it's hard. But I think you have to really love the process, because the outcome is not guaranteed, right?
Mm-hmm.
We do not know what's going to happen with the book that we're working on. We don't know if it's going to sell. We don't know if people are going to like it. There's no guarantee. And so I think you do have to fall in love with the process of it, or else really what's the point?
That reminds me, another conversation we have a lot is like, what is success? Like, what is success look like? Because there are so many outside factors that we can't control. We cannot control if like how many books we sell. We cannot control if a celebrity, like, cross your fingers one day, picks our book up and loves it. We cannot control, like, there's so many things we can't control. So we really try to keep each other grounded and realize, like, what we can control is writing the best book we can do. And we've really tried to hold success to the fact that, like, we sold another 2 books. Our publishing company wants to keep working with us. So that means that in their eyes, we were at least successful enough to give us another shot. So really just trying to keep our heads grounded on what we can control and trying to focus on that.
I've heard both of you say a lot how important each other has been to your journey. And I think writing can be very isolating. It can be very discouraging. And it is important to have that writing community. So I hear you talking about a lot of the pluses of working together. I have a 2-part question. Are there challenges to that? And for authors who don't work with a partner necessarily, what's the answer to finding that?
Do you want to go through some of the cons? We've done a pro and con list. So we
we did write a whole essay on the pros and cons.
I will post a link to that.
Yes. I mean, yeah, of course there are challenges with working with someone else. And we do hear from a lot of writers that are like, oh, I could never do that. I could never write with someone else. And I think there's a couple of reasons why it works well with us. And one is because we were critique partners and very familiar with each other. And also because I think it helps that we each take ownership of a character, so we can feel we really can sort of dive into that one character. And of course we help each other with that and critique each other and edit each other. But I think that helps. But I mean, of course it can be challenging. And sometimes, we do disagree, and that's part of the creative process. But we have a lot of trust in each other, and also a lot of, we push each other quite a bit. And so I think by the time I think we mentioned this in the essay that we wrote for you, by the time we finish with a draft of a book, it's way cleaner and way stronger than a draft that we write on our own. It is, it reads more like a third draft, honestly, by the time we finish it, because we've been pushing each other the entire time to make this scene better. What is the character feeling here? What setting is this? What position are they in right now?
Oh, goodness.
All sorts of questions, right?
And I think to what Bradeigh said, and we addressed this in the essay, is that that when we do have a moment of disagreement, a lot of times whatever comes out of it becomes stronger, because what that might mean is that maybe the person writing that chapter didn't clearly explain what they were thinking. It didn't show up as much on the page, or we point out a problem or come up with something that's even stronger. So we have a built-in editor. So our editing and writing process is so combined, and we both know the story so well and intimately But yeah, we have a whole list of pros and cons, but there are mostly pros. Otherwise, I don't know if we'd be doing it still.
So do you think it's necessary for authors who are writing by themselves to find someone to do that with them, even if they're not writing it together, to find someone to be that person or their support person or their cheerleader or whatever that looks like?
I think so, but I think that like I believe that writing is not a solo sport. Like Bradeigh said, you're in a room by yourself, but you know, one of the things I say, I have so many different, analogies and metaphors, but when you finish a book, your agent wants to have something to have their fingerprints on it, and your editor wants to be able to put their fingerprints on it. And it's not like a solo process, but other people, other readers, and it doesn't have to be critique partners, but other trusted readers who you have a good relationship with can help you point out problems and help you strengthen it, because nobody writes a book on their own. And I feel like I've been really lucky to have a community. Other writers is the best thing about being a writer. When I was querying, I had a group of querying writers. When I was on submission, I was in a group with other writers on submission, because every step of the process has so many unique pain points that you don't understand unless you're in that also. And just the support, this is really, really hard. Like even people who are massively successful, it was hard for them too. And I think that camaraderie and community and support is really the only way that we can survive.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's a lot of no's in the business. And I think you need people who are always in your corner giving you the yeses and this is good and hang in there, or this is not good yet.
Even
but
if it's not
that
good.
You're not good.
Yeah.
It's a process and this is normal.
Mm-hmm.
We may have covered this in some oblique way, but what do you guys wish you had known at the beginning of your careers? What would you tell somebody starting out now that you would like to have saved yourself the trouble of learning?
Avoid 2020. For me, I think that the biggest lesson I learned was finish first. Like, again, I spent so much time perfecting pages that were going to be gone. And so like just to finish it, and then you can shape it. One of my favorite quotes is from Jodi Picoult. That's, you can edit a bad page, but you can't edit a blank page. And so just getting it down. Bradeigh always tells me, because I struggle a lot, especially in the middle of first drafts, that the first draft's only job is to exist. And so just to power through and you can fix it later. I think that's a big one. And then also, like I said, don't stop. Like just because you have somebody interested, an agent, like don't stop like I did. Keep going.
Oh, talk about that for a second. I wanted to dig in when you said that. Often authors are told, and certainly agencies will say, don't query more than one person at a time. And if you get a request, stop querying, because that's...
Oh, no.
Well, see, now I was always with you. I'm like, no, I'm just going to put as many of those out there as I can. So just ignore that advice, basically?
Yes, it's wrong, I think. I mean, I really do believe that.
It handicaps the author.
Yes, because the publishing process is so slow. Like querying, if you don't hear an answer, I think is it 2 months or 3 months? So you have to wait 3 months to know if it's a pass. So if you wait and then it ends up being a no, then you've put yourself back 5 months, 6 months, 7 months, and it's already so slow. And I'll tell you something that I did, which may not be like the most moral, but there was a moment when I got a phone call request and I was like, this is my chance. And I sent out more queries because I was like, I will be able to say, hey, I got an offer. And if there were other agents that I had been interested in. And so, no, I think that there are so many things in this business that put the author at a disadvantage. Like querying is your chance. Like, don't, I do think that there's a science, and it's smart to not send them all at once, because you can learn from them. Like if you don't get any requests, there might be something wrong with your query or your pages, but just don't stop, keep going, because it's so slow and so long. And I don't agree with that. If that's the going advice.
I'm really glad you said it, because I think it is the going advice. And I think especially a lot of agencies, as I said, will tell authors that, and it does give them an advantage. But I think, as you said, authors are already working with a number of disadvantages, and it does set you back way too far. The one exception to that we should probably point out is don't simultaneously query more than one agent at an agency.
Exactly.
Bradeigh, what do you wish you'd known?
What do I wish? I think I just wish I would have known it's going to be okay. It's all going to work out. And I remember hearing people say at the beginning when I was querying, going through all these, rejections and struggles and near misses, saying, well, the people who end up getting published are the ones who don't quit. I'm like, well, obviously, right? Like they don't quit because like good things are happening for them. But it's true that I think you just keep going. And if you don't like it enough to keep going, I will say it doesn't magically get easier when you get an agent or when you get a book deal. It's just different challenges. It feels very much the same emotionally, to me anyway. The ups and downs that you go through with your editor or with getting reviews, it feels very similar. So I think that whole process of querying and near misses very much prepared me for sort of the emotional ups and downs of being published.
I think there's even more pressure.
Easier.
It doesn't. And there are different pressures. I mean, now you've got deadlines and you've got expectations and you have marketing and your previous sales. I did in a lot of these interviews, I've had authors tell me that the freest and best they ever felt as authors was either before they signed a publishing contract or in between contracts.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because all that, I think pre-published, we forget to sort of savor the freedom that we have to do what you were talking about, Alison, to take your time with a manuscript, to maybe not 15 years, but to make it what you want it to be, and not feel, especially when you're learning, not feel that pressure of performing that I think can come with publishing.
And I think that, Bradeigh and I were both in this situation. So by the time I sold You and Me and Us, I already had a draft of Little Pieces of Me. So like the other advice is keep going. Like when you finish one, like take a little mental break, but then keep going, because I don't know if I would have been able, the whole book a year thing, which is another topic, but we were both so lucky because we had another draft ready to go. And we didn't have that pressure of staring at the blank page, being like sophomore slump or things like that. So I think we were both very lucky that we didn't have to start from scratch for the second book, that we had a draft in the wings.
One last thing I wanted to touch on before I let you guys go, and thank you for all your time, is that you both write in different genres from each other, and then yet still a third genre together. Alison, you do upmarket women's fiction. Bradeigh, you do sort of psychological suspense. And then together you do still women's fiction, but it seems, I want to say a little bit lighter, but that's not the right word.
Lighter. There's a lot more romance involved. Yeah.
And humor. So was this a deliberate choice, or is this kind of like, oh, this is our fun outlet? Does that genre that you write in together arise from the fact that this is more kind of light and fun for you guys?
I think so. I mean, when we first started getting, that initial idea, it was the middle of the pandemic. And I think we wanted something that felt light and fun and escapist. And it still does. I think we hope to corner the market on stories about sisters and best friends who each have a romance in the summer.
and I think, again, another thing just about the publishing industry is that we didn't set out to be like, this is the genre we want to write in. We're like, this is the story we want to write, and this is the kind of story. And one thing that it's been really exciting is that people who like women's fiction have been really drawn to the personal growth and the relationship between the sisters. And then they get surprised and delighted, or they can skim the steamy scenes if they don't want them. And people who love romance get like not one, but two different romances, two different arcs, and two different steamy scenes and book boyfriends. And they've really enjoyed the additional depth of the sisterhood relationship. So it's really kind of the best of both worlds, and just the books that we like to read.
Have you found the same crossover with your readers, Bradeigh?
Crossover between my
Ali Brady books and your own books?
Interestingly, yes. I think that women who read thrillers are also women who read like romantic comedy and lighter, women's fiction. For whatever reason, they're very similar readers. And plus, my thrillers happen to also be about sisters. They're just a little darker and more dysfunctional.
They're really good.
So we've got The Comeback Summer is coming out, or has come out in May. And where can readers find each of you and find you together?
Go ahead, Alison.
Okay. On Instagram, we're most active on Instagram. We are Ali Brady Books. We're not really on Twitter, but it's the same name. And our website is alibraidyBooks.net.com was taken, so we are .net. I am This Hammer, not That Hammer, but This Hammer. on all of the social media platforms, and my solo website's alisonhammer.com.
With one
And
L.
I'm-
One L, with one L, yes.
And I'm Bradeigh Godfrey on Instagram and all the socials, and bradeiggodfrey.com for my website.
Do you want to spell Brady?
Bradeigh.
I'll put those links below as well. And also your names are showing up so people can hopefully look at that, but I'll put links below. Thank you both. I'm a fan of you both together, separately. And I just loved talking to you and hearing about your process. I love the essay you wrote about not only how you edit and revise, but your writing process as a duo that I think readers will find really interesting. So thanks for joining and good luck with this release.
Thank you for having us. It's so fun.
Thank you so much, Tiffany.
Thanks, Bradeigh. Bye, guys.
Bye.